Hey there. How do you measure success? It's a simple question. Most of us already have an answer. A promotion, a championship, a business built from the ground up, a degree earned, a life made more comfortable than the one you started with. These are meaningful achievements. They deserve to be celebrated. And yet I wonder if they are only part of the story. Imagine two athletes standing on the same Olympic podium. Both have won silver. Both wear the same medal. On paper, their achievements are identical. But watch their faces. One is smiling through tears. They've just achieved the greatest result of their life. The other can barely look up. They came expecting gold, and silver feels like a failure. The medal is the same, the experience could not be more different. Or imagine two people who both graduated from university. One comes from a family where higher education has been expected for generations. The other is the first person in their family to earn a degree. The qualification is identical. But is the achievement identical too? I've been sitting with these questions for a while because they've led me somewhere specific. I think the measurement has been incomplete. That is the realization I keep returning to. Welcome to the Strategic Thinker, TST for short. If you're a returning listener, thank you for being here. If this is your first time with us, I'm glad you found your way here. TST is a sanctuary for your mind, a calm space away from the noise where you can pause, think more deeply, and reset your direction. Every conversation here is designed to help you approach life, work, and decisions with more intention and more clarity. I'm Alan, your host. Let's dive in. The way we measure success matters more than we realize. Because whatever we choose to measure eventually shapes the way we live. When success is only about reaching the next milestone, every achievement becomes temporary. The promotion lasts a few weeks. The excitement of a new home fades. The medal is eventually placed in a cabinet. And before long, we are searching for the next thing. Ambition is one of the greatest drivers of human progress. It inspires us to create, to build, to solve problems that once seemed impossible. I hope every one of us has something worth chasing, but ambition can also become restless, because every time we reach a summit, another one appears on the horizon. And without noticing, we begin judging ourselves almost entirely by where we stand today. The distance already traveled disappears from view. What we've overcome stops being counted. The person we've had to become along the way goes unrecognized. That is the harder way to measure a life than it needs to be. Because life isn't lived only at the finish line. It's lived in the climb. I learned this through my own career, and it took longer than I like to admit. I graduated from Michigan with a master's in aerospace engineering and went into the defense industry. The work was interesting. It paid reasonably well for a graduate, and the progression was slow. Two friends from around the same graduating cohort took different paths. One went into electrical engineering, working in semiconductor fabrication, at a time when that field was the darling of the tech sector. He moved quickly. He had equity. At one point, I estimated that what he earned in a year was roughly what I would earn in 4. The other went into industrial design. He designed bicycles for giants. He designed ASUS laptops, including ones finished in leather. Objects you could hold in your hands. Objects you could point at. We had started at the same place, at roughly the same time. And within just a few years, the gap between us felt vast. I want to be honest about how that felt. I was really happy for them. I was also unhappy about where I was. Both were true at once, and they sat uncomfortably together. Standing in that moment, I truly could not see how I would close the distance. The lead they had built felt like something I would spend my career chasing rather than something I could realistically overcome. I felt stuck. I felt I could have done better and should have done better. There was also something structural I did not appreciate at the time. My role eventually pivoted towards automotive, and I found myself in early research and development for the launch of a new car brand. Very interesting work, but after a couple of years, the cars still had not reached the market. That is simply the nature of long development cycles. The progress was real. It was almost impossible to point it though. Meanwhile, my friends were shipping products people could buy. So I was comparing the visible against the invisible without ever naming that this was what I was doing. Looking back, I'm grateful for that discomfort because it pushed me toward a better question. The question that actually helped me was, what do I need to learn to operate at that level? That question changed everything. It led me to pursue an MBA, into management consulting, into decisions that accelerated my career in ways I couldn't have imagined at that time. But here's what took me much longer to understand. I was seeing the glamorous side of their careers, the compensation, the visibility, the products on shelves. What I could not see was what those things cost. I learned much later that my friend in semiconductors was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He could be woken at 2 in the morning and had to go into the fab to make sure production was still running. His work was operationalizing the latest silicon fabrication tech, and if the company fell behind, it would lose market position. His equity was then contingent on that company continuing to win a race it did not fully control. Something entirely outside his hands could have made it worth a fraction of what he needed when the time came to sell it and fund his MBA. My other friend gave up weekends, sleep, and time with people he cared about. He later left the design organization to start his own industrial design business, which carried its own set of uncertainties. And I had reasonable work-life balance for years. I paid that back later during nearly 7 years in management consulting, but at the time I was making a comparison. I was comparing their visible outcome against my visible outcomes and leaving out everything neither of us could see from the outside. Where we all landed, incidentally, is less dramatic than a gap once felt. All of us are financially stable. All of us are reasonably happy with the careers we built. All of us have decent optionality. We took very different roads. Comparing them was never really possible. This episode is about finding a more complete measure, one that accounts for where someone finished and for the distance they had to travel to get there. Because those are two very different things, and wisdom, I've come to believe, requires holding both in view. Every meaningful achievement has two measurements. The first is visible. It's where someone finishes. Did they win? Did they earn the promotion? Did they build the business? Did they qualify for the Olympics? These are the achievements the world celebrates, and rightly so. Results matter. Performance matters. Excellence deserves pursuit. Aim for the championship, even if you never get there, because if the aim isn't high enough, we'll never discover what we are truly capable of. The second measurement is much harder to see. How far did the person have to travel to reach this point? Where did they begin? What obstacles stood in their way? What skills did they have to build from nothing? What fears did they have to walk through? Those things rarely appear on a resume. They are not listed on a trophy. You won't find them in a headline, but they are part of every achievement, and sometimes they are the most remarkable part. Let me give you an example that illustrates this. Most people who follow tennis will recognize what a world ranking of 33 means. It means you belong, without question, at the highest level of the sport globally. To reach it, you have beaten players who have beaten champions. Rendy Lu is a Taiwanese tennis player whose full name is Lu Yansun. In November 2010, he reached a career high ranking of 33. At that moment, he was the highest ranked Asian player in the world. 6 years earlier, he had become the first player from Taiwan ever to break into the ATP Top 100. He would go on to compete in singles at 5 Olympic Games and to carry his country's flag into the opening ceremony in Tokyo. Those are the facts the record books hold. What the record books don't hold is what it took. Taiwan is not a tennis nation. There is no deep infrastructure, no established pathway, no long history of producing players who compete at the top of the global game. A player from a country with that tradition arrives in professional tennis with systems already built around them. Coaching networks, domestic tournament structures, a community of peers who have walked the same path before. Rendy arrived without most of that, and the barrier was structural as well as cultural. In much of East Asia, professional sport is rarely the path families encourage. The expectation, reasonable and deeply held, tends to be education, stability, a profession with a clear future. For parents to support a child choosing professional tennis in a country where the pathway is unclear and the outcomes uncertain requires a different kind of faith than it does in a country where tennis has produced generations of champions. His parents were initially reluctant. As a young player, he staged what you would later describe as a hunger strike, declining dinner, to persuade them. They eventually agreed on one condition. His grades had to stay up. And he kept his word. What followed were years of building something from almost nothing. The ATP Challenge Tour, where the long and largely unwatched grind toward the top 100 ranking happens, is concentrated in Europe and the United States. Getting to those tournaments from Taiwan meant constant international travel, significant personal cost, and months away from home each year. For much of his early professional career, that cost was carried by his family. There was no national federation funding his development. Corporate support came later, after rankings justified it. In the years before that, it was Rendy and his family who kept choosing, season after season, to believe it was worth continuing. He went on to win more ATP Challenger Tour titles than any other player in the history of the tour. That sentence is worth pausing on. More Challenger titles than anyone, ever. That record was built where almost nobody was watching, which makes it a strange kind of achievement. The most dominant career in the history of a tour that few casual fans follow. And then there was Wimbledon. In 2010, on grass, he faced Andy Roddick, a former world number 1, a 3-time finalist on that same court. The match lasted 4.5 hours. Rendy Lu won and became the first player from Taiwan to reach the quarterfinals of a Grand Slam. That is the match people remember. 4.5 hours out of a 20-year career. Because the ranking of 33 was reached in 2010 and the career continued for another 11 years. 10 consecutive seasons inside the world's top 100 from 2008 and 2017, an elbow surgery in 2016 that cost him 4 months, then a shoulder injury that kept him off the tour for 20 months and dropped him off the rankings entirely. He came back from that, and at the age of 37, he walked into an Olympic stadium in Tokyo carrying his country's flag. None of that is contained in the number 33. Imagine two players reaching exactly the same ranking at exactly the same moment. One grew up inside a system built to support them. The other built the system as they went, funded by family, guided by conviction, in a country and a culture where the path had barely been walked before. Measuring only where they finished, we would conclude they achieved the same thing. Understanding the journey, though, we begin to see each achievement more completely. And that is all. His story points towards something worth naming. We see the equity and the products on shelves. We don't see the 2 a.m. phone calls. And yet, these are the pictures we compare ourselves against. The finished versions, the polished outcome, the visible destinations, the highlight reels. When we measure our own work in progress against someone else's completed chapter, the comparison will always feel unflattering. Because we are the only ones who know how incomplete our own story still feels from the inside. This is not an argument against comparison. Comparison can sharpen aspiration. It can help us recognize what is possible. It can expand what we believe we might achieve if we stay honest about what we are actually comparing. The problem is the incompleteness. We compare their destination with our journey, their finished chapter with our work in progress, their visible achievement with our invisible effort. And then we draw conclusions from that comparison, conclusions that are always almost unfair to us. A more complete form of comparison asks different questions. When you see someone who has achieved something remarkable, ask what it cost them as well as what it produced. Ask what the journey looked like before the destination became visible. Those questions will not always produce comfortable answers, but they will produce more honest ones. There's one final reason this way of measuring success matters. It does not only change how we see ourselves, it changes how we see everyone else. And this, I think, is the most important part. The colleague who earns a promotion after rebuilding their confidence following a significant setback. The parent who returns to study while raising young children. The entrepreneur whose first successful business arrives after several failed ones. The friend who seems to make steady progress while carrying burdens nobody else can see. Success rarely tells the whole story. Most of the story remains invisible, which is perhaps why we should be a little slower to judge, a little quicker to become curious. The people I find myself admiring most are not always the ones with the most impressive results. They are the ones who have traveled the greatest distance, the ones who kept going when stopping would have been easier, the ones who kept learning, kept improving, kept showing up when the outcome was still entirely uncertain. These are journeys we rarely applaud because most of them happen when no one is watching. The years Rendy Lu spent grinding through the challenger tournaments in European cities, far from home, funded by his family before the ranking made corporate support possible, those years were not a public spectacle. They were private work, winning enough to keep going, learning enough to keep improving, building a record that would eventually become the most challenger titles in the history of the tour. Nobody applauded the decision to get on yet another flight. And here is something worth holding about his story specifically. The path he built largely alone, is now a path that exists. Rendy has established a tennis academy in Taiwan. The knowledge he accumulated across 20 years on tour, how to navigate the challenger circuit, how to manage a professional career with limited institutional support, how to sustain a ranking in a system not designed for players like him in mind, that knowledge is now available to the next generation in a way it was not available to him. His success also shifted something cultural. Parents who once might have redirected a child away from professional tennis can now point to someone who walked that road and arrived somewhere remarkable. The conversation inside families is slightly different because of what he did. The system and the support structures available to a talented young Taiwanese player today are meaningfully better than what existed when Rendy was trying to get onto the ATP tour, in part because of what he demonstrated was possible. That is a different kind of achievement from the ranking. It appears in no record book. It will be announced at no ceremony, and it may outlast the ranking entirely. Maybe that is the invitation. Celebrate excellence, aim for the championship, and when you look at another person's success, remember that you are seeing the final chapter of a story you haven't read. So where does that leave us? Two questions worth carrying forward. The first is about ambition. So, what is your championship? The goal that genuinely stretches you, the one that requires you to become a different version of yourself in order to reach it. Go for it, even if it feels beyond your reach today, because none of us truly knows where our ceiling is. Rendy Lu, at 8 years old, refusing dinner to persuade his parents, could not have imagined a career high ranking of 33 and a Wimbledon quarterfinal. He could only make the next decision available to him, and then the one after that. The destination rarely reveals itself in advance. The second question is about perspective. So, how are you measuring yourself? Measured only against what still lies ahead, you will always feel behind. There will always be someone earning more, building faster, winning more. That race has no finish line. Measured also by the distance you've already traveled. Something different becomes visible. The conversations you can now have that once intimidated you, the decisions you now make with confidence that once paralyzed you, the resilience built through setbacks that nobody applauded at the time, and the judgment that only experience builds, which no shortcut has ever produced. None of those achievements come with a trophy, and yet they may be the very things preparing you for that next summit. Here's today's insight. Achievement tells us where someone finished. Distance traveled tell us how they got there. Wisdom is learning to hold both in view. One day, you will reach another milestone. People will see the result. They will congratulate you. They will admire what you've accomplished. What they won't see are the years that shaped it, the doubts you walked through, the habits you built in the early mornings when no one was watching, the decisions that no one applauded. You will know. Your loved ones will know. And that is enough, because success is measured by where you arrive and by the distance you traveled to get there, and by who you become along the way. When you learn to hold all three, you become more complete. Let's wrap this up. Rendy Lu retired in 2021 after 20 years as a professional. Somewhere in Taiwan, there is a young player being coached by him right now. Someone who will never have to build the path from nothing because it already exists. That player will not know what it cost to build it. Most of that work happened in cities they will never visit, in years before they were old enough to watch, but they will walk it. That is what the invisible years produce. Not only a ranking, a road that someone else gets to travel. So carry one question forward today. When you see someone who appears successful, ask yourself, what part of the journey am I not seeing? You may never know the full answer, but asking the question changes something. It replaces judgment with curiosity, comparison with perspective. Then ask yourself the question, how far have I already come? Your journey deserves to be measured too, and the road you are building may end up carrying someone you will never meet. Someone may have come to mind while you were listening today. A person whose journey you have only ever seen the outside of. If this conversation would mean something to them, consider passing it along. And if these conversations are adding something to your journey, the simplest way to make sure you never miss one is to follow the show wherever you listen. Think of it as reserving your seat in the sanctuary. As always, thank you for choosing to spend this time here with me. Your future self is being shaped by the choices you make today. Stay focused on your direction and take time to discover joy along the way. Until next time, make your next best decision and keep moving forward.